Back in 2002, the GameCube wasn't doing all that well. It had come out the previous year and was struggling against the older PS2 and even the original Xbox in terms of sales. One of the reasons this was the case was a lack of software, and one of Nintendo's old standbys that had been with them from the earliest days of the NES, Capcom, who had admittedly been gravitating more towards Sony since the PS1, announced that they were going to try and do something about it, with the Capcom 5, a series of 5 new games that would launch exclusively on the GameCube. The game I'm taking a look at today, Viewtiful Joe, was the second of the 4 games to be released. And while the game didn't top the charts at the time, it's become very popular and well known in subsequent years. Is it still worth playing today? As games of the era go, and even among the rest of the Capcom 5, Viewtiful Joe is shockingly traditional. At its core, the game is a 2D side-scrolling brawler, albeit one done in a great cel-shaded 3D style. And that style is the thing that has always stood out about Viewtiful Joe, even at the time. To be honest, the game still really stands out in that department. And we're not just talking about how the game looks, either. There's a ton of stylistic touches in just about every bit of its presentation, from the menus, to the energy meters, to the voice throwing snark at you every time you pause the game, to the director yelling cut when Joe dies. Even the environments are incredibly stylish and surprisingly varied, just as varied as the movies themselves that Viewtiful Joe is playing on as part of its core theming. Plus, the game makes some really great use of those movies for some set pieces that are both really fun and stand out a ton, both in terms of how inventive and impressive they are. After you absorb the first bits of that style in the form of the game's opening cutscene, the first thing you're presented with starting up the game is a toggle for either kids or adults, something I had to look up immediately to even understand what it meant. It turns out it's a difficulty setting. Now, you might start up the game in the adults mode and think, oh, this difficulty is fine, but you will absolutely hit a point where that ramps up dramatically. I highly recommend starting on kids difficulty and then ramping it up if you really like the game. Despite the name and what it might suggest in a modern game, don't worry, there's plenty of challenge to be had in the kids mode. In fact, later on, when they made the re-release of this game in Japan, they added another difficulty even easier than kids mode, and the fact they thought that was necessary should tell you a lot. At its core, the gameplay makes Viewtiful Joe an old-school 2D brawler, but it has some great touches outside its stylistic decisions. For one, I absolutely love the giant skull indicators it gives you for dodging high and low blows, making them a whole lot clearer when the screen gets busy. I also really enjoyed messing around with the mechanics for both slowing down and speeding up time, which are a huge part of the game. Many enemies simply start moving too fast in some way you can't punch them, and going into slow-mo is how you deal with them. Or, on the other hand, you'll need to speed things up in order to punch them more in a short period. And those mechanics come together to really mix things up and make it way more than a standard brawler. As I alluded to earlier though, this game does not mess around when it comes to its difficulty, like a lot of Capcom games from this era. I'm definitely getting strong Maximo vibes from this game in that very specific way. If you don't understand a mechanic, or you manage to mess up enough times, the game is absolutely going to punish you for that failure pretty quickly. Most crucially, while the game always lets you restart from your last save point when you run out of lives, boss battles never have saves right before them. You get a save halfway through any given level, and at the end of the level, but never right before the boss right at the end. Which means if you die enough times to a boss, you're back to the middle of the level, unless you bought the right item from the game's point store to prevent it, which pops up even at some points where you're not allowed to save. So, as a whole, I felt like it balanced out, especially once I had bought most of the upgrades I cared about and could just spend on extra lives and tokens that let me try again. Now, while I had a ton of fun playing the game as a whole, one place it falls pretty flat is its plot. Frankly, I didn't expect a good one here, but also I didn't expect or want one at all. And their attempt at creating one feels way too much of the time in terms of its incredibly snarky main character and generally eye-roll inducing plotting. Despite its status as one of the Capcom 5, the game's positioned as the saving grace to revive the fortunes of Nintendo's GameCube, Viewtiful Joe did eventually come out on the PS2, but I still think of this mostly as a GameCube game. Even though the PS2 version is totally fine, it was part of the Capcom 5 after all. I do still think the GameCube version is the version to play. As usual, it does look better than the PS2 version and has proper progressive scan support, which is a great thing to have from this era of games when you're trying to play them now. And I do think that if you have the chance, you should check out Viewtiful Joe. It's a delightfully old school experience with a ton of style. That while it hasn't aged incredibly well in some limited arenas, like the best Capcom classics, it still holds up incredibly well in the ways it matters most. Even if its comedy is going to very heavily depend on your taste, and even if its difficulty is that sort of classic Capcom hard, if you know what you're getting into, it's absolutely still worth a play now.